welcome to our first podcast with myself, Alex Mechanical, and Ivan Teese. I'm really excited about this project. Really, the whole purpose of this podcast is really to give people a platform to discuss certain issues that I'm sure a lot of us are all talking about, but more importantly, giving an opportunity for people to really discuss certain nuances and certain details that maybe gets overlooked in a wider platform. So these series of podcasts, which are not going to be too long, so it's not going to take too much of your time in the day, are hopefully going to be engaging and fun, but at the same time, informative. So welcome. And at this point, I'd like to introduce, well, first of all, Ivan, let's talk about you, sir. Glad that you're doing this podcast with me. What's your thoughts and feelings?
My thoughts and feelings are we've talked about doing this for a while, and I'm so glad to actually be sitting behind a camera and talking to you and two great guests, because we've had loads of these really deep conversations, and even the conversations we've had before, we should be recording this. This is good stuff. People need there's things that people need to hear here. So this is a great platform and opportunity to, get some great minds and people are doing some really good work and share it with other people and hopefully invoke some thoughts and feelings in others, basically.
Most definitely. Great. And I mean, at this point, I've got to say, I've got to big up some our first guests on this podcast and some old friends of mine. First of all, I want to introduce Jody Diaz. And then we've got also Shireen Niza. Have I pronounced it? Niza. Okay, I knew I was going to get that wrong. But first, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for coming on the podcast. And I've known Jody and Shireen for a long time. I used to be a youth worker in kind of the southern region of Newham, South Newham. And I met them as young people. But as they gotten older, they started to work as volunteers in the local youth club that I was based at. And, there were two very positive role models as young people, very forward thinking, always had, they were always reflective on situations and weren't the type of people that got caught up in trends, maybe trends that wasn't always serving them. And over the years, I've managed to see them growing up into adults who doing amazing positive things. So at this point, let's hear a few words from Jody, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having us. It's just lovely to be here again because you were our positive influence as we were growing up, I think, and there were always some deep and meaningful conversations to be had. So I'm Jody, and I have a background, as Alex mentioned, in youth work, which evolved into participation outreach. And more so right now I'm focused on education parts of education, social and cultural contexts in different business aspects of how that can be integrated for the benefit of all, hopefully.
Nice. Amazing. And then now we've got Shireen.
Hi, my name's Shireen. I'm what would I say my role is? I'm actually a youth, I call myself a youth practitioner. I am in this field because of people like you, Alex, who kind of pushed me from being a street rat to going into the youth club, and just giving me somewhere to chill when I didn't want to be at home. My field is more like I started in psychology, and then I've worked in education, I've worked in youth service, I've worked for children's services as well. So I have a lot of understanding of some of the issues young people face and some of the barriers that they have in life. And growing up in the area that I grew up in, and I've also lived in loads of different areas in London, I've seen this repeat itself over and over and over and over again. So it's nice to have a platform where we can just talk and maybe navigate or deconstruct some of the problems and talk about solutions for them.
Love it.
100%. Thank you very much for that, Shireen. And I mean, Ivan, I think although we've talked about our relationship and how we've known each other for a long time, I think it's important to give some of the listeners a bit of a background in yourself growing up in the area, but also know you're not originally from this area. So what's your story?
For me, I'm like this kind of weird Londoner. I've always seen myself as a weird Londoner. I was born up north in Middlesbrough, and early years moved to London because there was no jobs up there, so we had to come here. And I had a really thick northern accent when I came to London. And what was hilarious is in school, kids used to say to me, "Hey, don't you talk weird? And I'm like, no, you talk weird. Because everyone else sounded like a Cockney. And I was just like, for me, I got to see both worlds traveling up north twice, 3 times a year with my parents. And then being in London and just seeing those two worlds as well was actually quite eye-opening as well. One mini story was I remember walking down the street with my granddad, and he just randomly started singing. And this is a reflection of what it's like there versus here, especially back then. And my granddad starts singing, and next thing you know, this old woman walks to her gates and joins in singing with him. And I remember standing there looking at my granddad thinking, like, what on earth is going on right now? And next thing you know, about 4 people in the street have got involved in this song.
Mad.
And there was backup dancers, flares. No, I'm playing. But it was just, for me, it was like in London, if you said hello to someone, no, exactly. It does not happen. So for me, it was like, it was interesting to see that difference.
Actually, saying that, the area that we grew up in, me and Jodie became friends because we basically used to live. Jodie could more or less see my house from her house.
Nice.
We used to live that close to each other, and it was like a little island in the middle of Newham where outsiders didn't really come. All the kids went to 2 schools. We all ended up going to the same secondary schools. All of our parents knew each other. The shopkeeper knew your mum. The next door neighbour knew your mum.
Yeah.
Like, everybody knew each other. So,
it was like city village life.
Yeah. And Jodie, who now lives in a village, actually, it reminds me of when we're in your area, because people are really friendly. I still live in London. I don't live in Newham anymore. I've moved out to Essex. I live on a new build development, and I bumped into one of my neighbours going into my lift the other day. I smiled at her. She looked at me and didn't say nothing. Like, I would say hello to my neighbours and they pretend like I don't exist. And it's something that I've noticed. And I would say the changes in that particular area that we lived in, that's one of the major changes. Like, people don't really know each other the way that they used to know each other.
Community.
And I think in London as a whole, where it used to be loads of little communities where people really had a culture and a spirit and an idea of who they were and things that they did, then their customs. London don't really have that anymore. So you've got all these different people trying to live in the same space but have no interaction, and you don't really know what your neighbour's doing upstairs, downstairs, left or right from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point that you've mentioned there, because actually, like, so for those who knows anything about Newham, there was for a long time quite a distinct difference between the vibe of North Newham. And when I say North Newham, I'm going to say north of the A13 versus south of the A13. It was often demographics was one of the most obvious things, but also I would say south of the A13, which is the A13 is the main road that kind of is like one of the veins of East London.
Go straight down the middle, right?
And straight out into Essex, but below the A13, south of the A13, public transport was often really low, was quite poor. So it meant that you didn't really go into the area unless you really had a reason to. You knew somebody. But even where I lived, which was in Custom House, moving even more further south was this island set up that Jodie and Shireen are talking about. That even for me, that only lived a mile away from there, it felt like a completely different world. And I would definitely say that even when Newham was going through its transition, where Jodie and Shireen are talking about really was probably the last to see that change that happen as we know it today.
And I think it's still, in terms of the north and south of the borough being very different, it's very much the same.
Yeah.
And I think the north-south divide also conflates some of the issues because, if you're from the north, you have no reason to venture into the south unless you're going somewhere like Excel or I can't even think of anything else in the south of the borough.
There isn't much, no.
Or the airport. You're not really going to go in.
But even then, those two things you said, XL isn't for the people of the area and neither is City Airport. So you're right.
And even it's like the things like the skyline, the docks.
Exactly,
so if you
the
grew
docks,
up in the south of the borough, you spent a lot of time on the docks.
Yeah.
Kids used to do PE on the docks. Loads of the people my age, up until maybe 5 years younger than me, remember doing PE on the docks. If you're from the south of the borough. Anyone from north of the borough has no clue what I'm talking about. And then they would be like, you did what? So by the time I was 12, I could sail, I could canoe, I could row because I lived next to a body of water. But my peers, so Jodie, who went to school in the north of the borough, did you even touch the docks?
Never touched the docks. I didn't even touch a swimming pool, if I'm honest. But my story is actually similar to Ivan's, in the sense that I was actually born in Glasgow and I moved to London with my family, and my mum's motivation to move us all quite young was because of racial aspects in Scotland, where I come from a black family. My siblings are black. My mum didn't want my siblings to experience what she'd experienced growing up. So our motivation to move to London was for culture, was to be part of a community that was lacking where we originally were. But like Shireen said, it's a kind of juxtaposition with Newham, because in our area, North Woolwich, we had opportunities. I did do rowing in primary school in year 6. We had opportunities to do sports that we'd say posh kids get to do, right?
Right.
But it wasn't sustainable. There was no longevity or clubs involved or projects that allowed us to continue that. It was then only accessible for the local university students, who we all know are not even from the area.
No.
And that
so
was
it's
before
a
the
kind of
university
thing
had
where
moved
you
there.
have a glimpse of opportunity, or a different way to stay out of trouble and stay off the streets as such, but then it gets whipped away from you because kind of, even though we're filled with all this activity around the docks and the opportunity in business development, it doesn't actually benefit the communities in any positive way. It hasn't provided job structures, as a new industrial revolution, or it's just completely the opposite. If imagine a dystopian future, North Woolwich would have been the city, that the place where it was based.
Could you almost say it's similar to like when you watch films like Blade Runner and stuff, and they're like, you've got the giant holograms of what it could be. It's like this woman dancing in a nightclub, but actually you're on your way to work, and you'd love to go and enjoy that, but you just got to get to work. So that kind of those amenities that are there, it's like, oh wow, I would love to go and do some fencing or whatnot. But it's like, and even though I think to your point, Jodie, you get a taste of it, but then when you find out that what the upkeep is to keep doing something like that, so even if a little bit of money was put into you going to try it, it is literally just that taster. But
for a long time, a lot of people that lived in the south of the borough were employed by Tate and Lyle, which was like bang smack in the middle of Silvertown. And actually a lot of Tate and Lyle's factories have now been bought. So the land has been sold, and it's now that whole Royal Wharf regeneration.
The real estate,
Pontoon dock, all the way down to Royal Wharf.
The only thing that's left is the Lyle, the treacle factory or whatnot.
Or whatever it is that's left. But for almost 3 miles, that stretch of walkway used to be Tate and Lyle. And that used to employ everyone in the area. I remember a lot of the kids I went to school with, a lot of their parents went to Tate and Lyle. I missed that trip, thankfully. I was annoyed with the sugar, like smelling sugar.
You missed that. It was amazing. It was amazing.
But once that started shutting down, you could really see the poverty in the area. You could really see how people started to struggle. And now something that used to employ half the borough has now developed into houses, which the majority of the borough cannot even afford to purchase.
Interesting. So the bit that I didn't know was about the fact that Tate and Lyle owned all that land. But there was something that happened at Youth Club at St John's that really started to, what should I say, really started to get me really thinking about this disjointment that you're speaking about. Do you remember when the Docklands Light Railway was building this extension to Woolwich Arsenal, and then they came to the youth club because they heard about one of the young people that got killed along that route where it was being built, and therefore wanted to build a plaque in his memory. And they turned up at the youth club. Marion, our manager, kind of and told the young people that they're going to be here on this day. Nobody showed up, and it blew my head, because in a way, what I was thinking as an adult was, wow, so you've got this big Docklands Light Railway, they've heard about my friend, and they want to do something in memory of my friend. Right, and they're asking me what I want. With all that money they've got, let me go. Nobody turned up. Wow. And that was the first time that I realised that this kind of disjointment that we're seeing is almost more than just about an industry coming through and doing what they're doing with no real regard. It's also about the fact that within the community, there's probably no kind of interest to even want to engage.
But
so,
Al,
go ahead.
In order for them to build that extension, so remember, they got rid of the silver link that used to stop in North Woolwich to bring in the DLR.
DLR, that's right.
They actually knocked down the primary school where the London City Airport train station currently stands.
Yes.
That was my primary school.
And that was Jodie's primary school, to move it to where it is now in order to create that extension. Now, for everybody in the area, we were so happy for that, because the Silverlink at the time either came every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. And for people that don't know, the Silverlink was the overground before it became the overground.
It was.
It used to go from North Woolwich to Richmond, and that was the longest journey you would ever do in your life if you do from end to end. But they knocked down.
I feel like someone's offloading here now.
No, but they knocked down a whole primary school, like a big part of the area, to build, expand City Airport and build the infrastructure. But did they really? Like, yes, we were happy to have a DLR, because at the time, I think it ran every 10 minutes. Now, if you live on that stretch, you'll get a DLR every 3 minutes, which is great for those that are now here. But those of us that were there 20 plus years ago didn't have any of that. But what has it done for the area? How many people that live in the area actually work at the airport? How many people in the area are accessing? So right now they've got the Crossrail that's going to run straight through the middle of Silvertown.
Interesting that you say that, Crossrail. I've heard of it, but I don't know. I've never seen it. What is that Crossrail sort of thing? What's that, 2025?
No, it opened.
I'm taking the mick. I know they're doing a little small part of it. We see it go by, and it's a little bit. It's a little bit like what we were talking about earlier. You see it like, oh, that looks great. That thing that just whizzed past and get you to Canary Wharf in 7 minutes. It's got me nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and the people that live in that area have suffered 10 years of that building.
Yes.
Because it's been delayed by how many years? I remember when I lived there and they were breaking ground for like 2 years straight. All we heard was just drilling all day long. Yeah. And before that, it was the DLR. Before that, it was the extension of the airport. Before that, it was something else. So the area is constantly being...
So it's evolving and getting, like, you've got the Abu Dhabi Centre XL. I think XL for me was the one that was closest to home. Am I right, Alex?
Yes.
It was like there was a wasteland there. It was just a big open area, and then all of a sudden, and a small thing that happened to me one time is that I used to rollerblade and skateboard, and there wasn't a lot to do in Custom House back then. So skateboarding for me was a way to do something. And I remember going over to XL close to the Connaught, and we spent the whole summer almost building ramps in this like broken down area full of tetanus and everything. And we just finished the ramp, and we'd had like 1 day with it. And all of a sudden these builders come over and they were like, "Hey boys, sorry, you got to leave." And we were like, "What? What do you mean leave? We're outside." And he was like, "You can't leave outside." And he was like, "No, we're blocking this off. So we're going to build something here." And then all of a sudden XL appeared, and to everyone's points, is something on the doorstep. But
you know what, though? I think, but that point for Silvertown and Woolwich, though, I mean, it's absolutely true, because, I mean, that train just comes up out the tunnel and then goes back in the tunnel. So all that basically you're experiencing is just seeing a new train.
And they're using the old Silverlink line, so they never got rid of the tracks. They never, so it goes from, I believe it goes Canary Wharf, Canning Town,
Canary Wharf, Custom House, not Canning Town, just Custom House.
Okay, so Canary Wharf, Custom House,
Woolwich,
and then Abbey Wood.
Abbey Wood, that's it.
So they've given you some links, so you can go from Custom House to Abbey to Woolwich, and then get on the train back to North Woolwich. Or you can go Canary Wharf and then get on the train back to Canning Town and stuff. But it's like, oh, you can see us, but we don't really want to see you.
Yeah, they're literally building all the developments around the outskirts of the hood. Do you know what I mean? It's like we're building around where you can just watch, but there's not many opportunity for people in the centre of that gentrification to be involved for their own communities. And that goes back to maybe what Alex was saying about people not turning up in the community for people being offered for plaques, is it because there's a lot of distrust there? You don't trust that big companies are doing the right for your area. So therefore you don't want to put yourself out there as such, because, you know, every human being fears rejection or misunderstanding.
I think that's a brilliant link to move this ahead now, because
Agreed.
now the reason why we came together was really to talk about the youth culture and, you know, youth crime and some of the concerns in places like Newham. And I think what you've just done, what we've all just done, is by this discussion is set a tone for maybe the reality of people's existence and what the perception of it is. What you've just highlighted is the fact that in an area like Newham, where we have a lot of high unemployment, but at the same time, there's almost this juxtaposition of like
Wealth,
ridiculous,
extreme wealth.
right, built on your doorstep, but yet it's not your reality.
No.
And I think that's very important when we're then entering into the next stage of the conversation, talking about youth crime. Now, I've been to lots of different meetings. I've been to lots of kind of, should I say, regeneration meetings, local committees where local people who are interested in coming out to the meetings are saying that they're concerned. They feel like an area like Newham, areas like Newham, we come from the south of Newham, is getting worse. Are saying youth crime is on the up, while at the same time, there's conversations about new development. So, you know, while you've got, say, for example, you've got Crossrail developing what they're doing. We've seen in recent years the XL being extended. And actually, I'm hearing that there have been proposals for an even further extension on top of that. So while these things are going... Well, I think they're using the car park area in what would that be, the eastern end of XL.
I was thinking of one of those ice cream desserts where it's got the two wafers and ice cream in between, like two XLs and then like an XO in the middle.
One
maybe.
on the top, you mean? Yeah, I think they want to go more eastwards and use some of that car park that only occasionally gets used. But again, this is happening amidst the genuine, real concerns of youth crime in an area like Custom House, Newham, the wider Newham. I mean, what's your thoughts on it? Is that an accurate kind of perspective, or is it more just a case of people are just maybe demonizing young people in areas like where we came from?
Statistically, young people aren't necessarily participating in as much crime as we thought. It has actually declined.
Right.
In terms of, like, if we're talking about youth crime or knife crime in London, has its peaks and flows. So in the last, I believe when I read up on it, it was like in the last 3 years, youth knife crime has actually reduced in London, but it's still like the highest in the country, and it's lower, and it's still higher than it has been when it's been at its lowest. And I think when you put young people in situations where they're constantly living in fight or flight for whatever reasons they are, they're going to find ways to protect themselves. And I think that's what's happened in the borough. And then when you've got this separation, like, we're not a cohesive borough. You've got the north side, you've got the south side. There's going to be conflict. And I believe there's always been some sort of conflict like that in the borough. Mm-hmm. But when we were younger, you know, it wasn't random people getting caught up in madness. You knew
Fight out in the basketball court.
Yeah, or you knew who the people, like the gangs were. East London has always had a culture of gangs, let's be real. It's always had a culture of gangs.
Yeah, right.
But old school gangs were like, oh, I'm going to get my knuckle dusters and my chains and we're going to fight it out in the street type thing. And people might think, oh my God, what is this West Side Story? But I went to school with people that were excluded for bringing in knuckle dusters to school.
Yeah.
I went to school in Canning Town. It was really rough. But now it's gone from we're going to fight it out to I don't feel safe at any point in time, so I'm going to carry this weapon to protect myself. And ultimately, as statistics shows us, those are the young people that end up being harmed because they are the ones that are carrying the weapon and it gets turned on them. And the question that we do have to ask is, why don't young people feel safe to walk around their borough?
Right.
Yeah, and that's a community aspect, isn't it? Like, I'd say just in opinion based, like, it seems that crime rate is increasing and yes, knife culture is increasing, but is that because the awareness around media is increasing about it? Because
And
then
the
once you
reporting.
combat, yeah, then you have to combat, like, the way I'd see it is like two perspectives: lack of resources, and, as Shireen said, the fear. It's to do with young people being fearful and having no direction. And we can just say, if we're going to look at it from the last decade, like, what could assist in that increase or kind of statistic base of staying similar is the fact that, you know, we all of us have been in a situation where we watched the whole of our youth services be closed down. We watched police stations get closed one after the other in Newham. And there was no sense of safety or security because you couldn't even run to your local police station. You didn't know your local police officer or your local detached youth worker because these spaces, safe spaces that they were no longer available. Everything just got boarded up and shut down, and there has been no repercussion to it. And in that time, to counteract it, all kind of projects have done is throw money in that direction to tackle a particular issue. But the issue is so deeply rooted that you have to be willing to get in the know-how, to make an effort to get to know the people that it's fully affecting, and not just having your opinion base be your solution.
Sure.
And that's maybe what's lacking, is because, yes, there are a lot of projects available now. We know that London has a lot of funding in comparison to the rest of the country. Like, I live in a countryside, but yes, our crime rates are low because we don't have that kind of city thing. There's more community based, but there's a lot less funding when it comes to projects because the community are stepping in.
Sure. Do
you see what I mean?
So what you're saying, Jodie, in some sense is almost like there's a lot more money available in these high crime rate areas, but the fact that there's a lot more opportunity for funding of projects, it's not necessarily addressing the issues that may be existing in these high crime rate areas.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, yes. I'm not saying that whoever wrote the project proposal doesn't have the best heart's intention. It just seems that a lot of the projects that I've personally been involved with, or know other people that have been involved, particularly in the areas that we grew up in and other areas of London, it always is run by someone who isn't from the area, doesn't know the area, and has no experience in that side of poverty or, you know, having lack of security and just all the things that our communities fear. You know, there are mothers every day fearing that their kids might not come home.
So are you saying it's like in a lot of things in British organizations and everywhere, a lot of the times we're finding people that are actually making decisions don't have adequate, and not necessarily experience in certain things, but actual kind of like living it, if that makes sense. Then the people that are appointed have not lived it or have the right, because there's what is it, there's street experience and there's experience, isn't it? Like there's reading a textbook of statistics, and then there's actually being there, working somewhere, and then, you know, closing up a youth centre or something like that and thinking to yourself, oh, you know, this is a bit spooky or whatnot, you know. It's quite different.
If we're going to talk about closing up of youth centres, I was one of the youth workers that was taken out of the youth work pool in that area when we had a change from a Labour government, which is supposed to be a socialist style government, like, you know, it's very liberal, to the Conservative government. One of the first cuts that the Conservative government made was youth funding. And within a year, when they came in 2010, I was made redundant in 2011, and they made the whole pool of youth workers. So I know exactly what the amount is, but I'm going to exaggerate it. So let's say we went from 200 youth workers to maybe 50 to 100 in overnight. And all of those 200 workers had to then compete with their colleagues and peers and people that we've trained with and built a community with for a job. And the way the youth service ran at that time, although you had a base youth club, you would bounce around the borough. So you got to learn not only the other workers, you got to learn the young people, you got to learn the schools, you got to learn the issues in each individual area, because everybody has individual issues. And then you got to develop your practice around that. A lot of places, the youth interventions were shut down straight away. So you don't have youth clubs, you don't have access to art, art is what brings out the expression and happiness in communities. You don't have that. You then have lost jobs because when we were at the end of a recession when the Conservatives come in, so you've got extreme poverty at the same time, and then you've got all these people dealing with all other issues like substance abuse, mental health, all compounded in one space with no provision for people to access.
No support.
No support. So even parents as a community, where do they go to? Who do they go to? Do they know how to access this information? Where before, like Mariam, the youth club manager that brought us all into this space, Mariam knew every young person's parent. She knew where everybody lived. She knew your siblings. She knew almost everything about you because she made it her business to know and build that community up. We don't have those community spaces anymore, so we don't really protect each other. So when issues like such and such has had a falling out, where the mums will drag them both by the ear and be like, you lot need to fix up, what is this? Yeah. You've got two separate families trying to battle the same issue with no communication with each other.
Do you know, and that's interesting because I know that's something I've noticed. So, for example, we're talking about the types of crime that, for example, in places like Newham and possibly in places like Tower Hamlets and other boroughs are used to. I saw the shift around the end of the 90s, and this kind of shift that I saw was, as you said, Newham has always been plagued with crime. And the style of crime, particularly, say, in the 80s and in the 90s, would have been around, like you said, knuckle dusters. It's there just to hurt somebody enough to say, just back off, you mark your territory. Also, back then, you were very clear on who was involved with it. And often those issues would unfold in a certain specific area. So you'd really have to be in those spaces, in those circles to get yourself caught up or at least see it.
You have to be really unlucky to be
around it, yeah. The shift for me changed around, I saw the changes happen towards the late 90s, but I would say the solidification of that change, I'd probably say was probably about 2004 is where I really saw that shift. And now we're in this space where the types of crimes that are taking place, often there's no real, it could happen at any place, in any social setting, daytime, nighttime, and there's no regard for if onlookers or people that happen to be in the vicinity could also get harmed in the process.
Do you think it's also the type of crimes that are actually happening as well? Because I think to your point, and you said about knuckle dusters and things like that, and everyone remembers someone in their family making a makeshift weapon of some stupidness, but it wasn't usually to take as an insta kill, if that makes sense. It wasn't to go and kill someone. It was to be like, hey, listen, I've got this and I might use it, sort of thing. Whereas today, when you consider as it's ramped up, acid attacks, for example, that wasn't something growing up when I was young. That was something that was done.
It was very rare.
So acid attacks, and that for me was, and to Jodie's point about the how desensitized we've come to it, because now acid attack is like, oh, not again. Where are they getting it from? And it's and you know when the stabbings, and I think someone mentioned it earlier about there's videos now online. So we're seeing that as well. It's also people, when they're stabbing, they ain't stabbing to slash you, to leave a mark, to say, hey, remember me. They're stabbing you to take a kid's life that won't go back to their mum. So I think, to your point, Alex, the crime has definitely ramped up, and it slowly got to the point where it's it's actually quite frightening, the kind of, we're desensitized to how extreme the attacks are as well.
So then my question would be to everyone is, what's changed? Because like you said, we've noticed that the crimes has changed, but why do we, I guess not what's changed, but why do we think, or what do we think is going on? Because I would say, going back to, I can't remember, I think it was Shireen, you said earlier on at the beginning of the conversation that it was much more of a community feel. So even though these crimes were unfolding, it was still kind of within a community setting, whereas nowadays the crimes are happening and it's almost like it only impacts a segment of the community, or the communities are so disjointed now that the mentality is very much, that's your problem, it's not my problem. Whereas back in the day, it would be number 37 saying, I know who your parents are, I'm going to go and tell them. What do we think's changed, and why do we think it's changed?
You don't have the number 37 saying, I know who your parents are. So I when I first started smoking when I was 16, I remember, because I had this conversation with the guy that used to own the off license. He also owned, a few years down the line, he ended up buying a local pub. And me and my parents went in there one day for Easter for a drink and whatever. And I was talking to him about how I used to sneak in the shop and buy cigarettes before I turned 16. Or maybe even after I turned 16, because I remember I was a year younger than his daughter. And I remember him saying to me, I couldn't remember your age. That's why I always used to sell it to you. And I was like, that's wonderful, because I was always worried you were going to tell my dad, because my dad used to always go into the shop to buy his little bits and pieces. And we had that, and we all laughed at it, because at this time I'm now a big 20, 30 years old. But that's the community that you had. Whereas now, you don't really have those types of communities. People don't really know each other like that. So where before, even if I didn't know your mum, Jodie would know your mum, or Alex would know your mum, be like, oh, can you speak to Shireen's mum? I saw her doing this X, Y, and Z the other day. Can you tell her to stop? Parents do not know the extent of what is going on with some of their kids. And I think part of the problem are things like social media. When I worked in schools, I used to get a lot of issues with like bullying via social media. And it'll be little things and they would taunt young people, and it'll be relentless. They will send them messages every single day. And it's still like that every single day. If they don't like someone, you're getting messages from everyone. And then they retaliate. It then starts going back and forth. And then the next thing you know, someone's getting stabbed in the street because they've had a disagreement over Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever medium they're using now. A lot of the deaths are for stupid things that when you really sit down and figure out the root cause of it, it's nothing.
You guys said some really cool stuff. I feel like you said about community, and it seems that there's a lack of it and a lack of communication. And I think some of the things that are happening, these crimes or these events that happen, are things that actually could have been quite easily avoided when you grab someone's ear and you drag them to the end of the street and say, hey, listen, she's been saying this about X, Y, and Z. And I feel like linking on to that, you've got the start of the conversation where we talked about we've got all these amenities around us that we can't use, like great things like Excel and stuff, and they're building these big buildings. And I think to your point, Alex, you said something along the lines of, oh, that's not my problem. And I feel like it's easy for some people to do that as well, because you work in Canary Wharf, it takes you 7 minutes when it happens, the Crossrail, 7 minutes to Canary Wharf, that's 7 minutes away from the problems that were in that area, and you can go into your office and do what you need to do. And I feel like that, that fight that's happening, or potentially that family that are disruptive, you might not, it's easy for you to just be like, oh, hey, I'm going to turn a blind eye to that and just go to work and do my thing, And that sense of community is even lacking because it's so easy to ignore it. Because, let's be real here. A lot of the things that we don't change things because we don't need to. We feel like we don't have to unless we're forced to do it,
Again, what I'm hearing as well, listen to everyone. So you've talked about disengagement from your family, from adults. You've talked about the bombardment of technology, the fact that it's evolving so fast, and so young people's brain are not changing. The evolution of young people's brain is still the same as it's always been.
Yeah,
so
your rate of information intake is more, but
Yes.
your processing services of that are
Still the same.
Retention.
it's probably suffering from PTSD.
Yeah,
And so the thing
it's true. No, Jodie, you're laughing, but it's true. A lot of young people, disconnecting from social media is a big thing.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, a few years ago, I deactivated my Facebook. And I remember when I first did it, everyone was like, oh, you're not on Facebook. I was like, yeah, so it's just an app. It's not a big deal. Fast forward to last year, I deactivated my Instagram. I still have conversations with people now, and they'll be like, oh, did you da-da-da-da-da? And I'm like, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot you're not on Insta. The metaverse and that world has now become everybody's world. And what we actually do in the here and now, people take for granted. They want to be 5 years ahead, but don't want to do the process of doing the work now.
Yeah. They want cheat codes, right?
Everybody wants a cheat code.
Yeah.
And I think with young people, and I've noticed a big change with social media has caused. So whereas, let's say, you or I would look up to celebrities, because they were quite distant and we saw small progressions of their careers, we can see the change and evolution. You've got 15-year-olds who want to be like Drake, who is my age, and has done 20 years of work, 15 years of work, should I say, because I remember in 2010 when he was coming to the UK and doing concerts for £30 all over the country, and can now command the whatever price he pays now because he's done the groundwork. We're not really teaching our children that. But at the same time, they're living in a society where things move faster than it ever has.
Yeah.
So whereas we're like, oh, but you've got to go through this process, they're looking at us like, well, my guy just did a TikTok video.
Yeah.
He got 100,000 views. He's someone. And it still blows my mind that in like interviews or something, they'll be like, oh, this person has 1 million followers on Instagram. I'm like, so what?
Yeah,
what does that do for them?
1 million followers doesn't convert to anything, and it reminds me of those Island Boys. I'm not even going to sing what they said, but they popped out of nowhere. And then what didn't help is people who'd built up, like Snoop Dogg and some other people, then gave them a platform to make them even bigger by trying to get views, but without realizing it inflated them to another level. But like you're saying, cheat codes, it's pure cheat codes, and people think that they can cheat just pure progression and hard work. And, and the cool one was Bitcoin. Bitcoin came around and everyone was like, oh, Bitcoin. It's like, dude, it's no different. It's just packaged in a different way. It's not a cheat code. You're just going to get bankrupt. So, yeah, that it's completely on point.
But the thing is, go on, Jodie.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say what you guys were just saying about the cheat codes is that's it. Young people are looking for cheat codes. And if they use, pillars of society in their community as examples, the cheat code is like, who's the biggest guy on a block? What car's he driving? How did he get it? And your first answer is drugs and gang culture.
And gang culture.
So that becomes your first point of aspiration, especially when you come from a family that has absent male figure.
Well said.
The background, the demographic in Newham is quite diverse. You've got people from different cultures. But when you look at it, if you're Asian, out in Western society, who is an Asian person that you can look up to? Like, let's even take outside of Bollywood and things like that. As a Western, British-born Asian person, who is it that you can look up to? As a Black British-born young person, who are your role models? If your role models are people who glorify this lifestyle, you're going to think it's cool to go around doing all these things. And then when you're listening to music, like a lot of the young people listen to drill, and I've seen the transition from jungle to garage to funky house and grime to now drill. Those predecessors didn't really talk much about violence. They might insinuate violence, but it was never, I'm going to come to your house. I'm going to
blap you in the face. It was like a little bit more clever, but it was there.
Whipping.
There you go.
They're not dry snitching, basically. And a lot of these young people will sit, and from some of the meetings that I've sat in and the experiences I've had, these young people will sit on social media, fire shots at someone, will post like a gun on Snapchat or a knife and their Rambos and their zombie knives or whatever they're called. And then someone who now has an issue with you is thinking, oh my God, he's walking around with a zombie sword. I'm going to need to get a bigger this thing. And
then you get the Crocodile Dundee thing where it's like, you call that a knife? This is a knife.
The really long one.
I know, you're talking about the one with the little cutouts and
Gone are the days where you can just hide it in your,
where you just flash
your
it,
trouser,
like in the movies.
Your sock. No, you have to carry a golf bag to carry your weapons now.
And it's ridiculous. And then it also makes me question, do we actually love ourselves? Because you're not going to kill someone that looks like you if you love yourself. A lot of these young people are killing themselves because they hate what they see. This is someone that is from the same area as me. You've got that. Why haven't I got that? I'm going to take that. You can't have that. If I can't have it, you're not going to have it either. And we need to get young people out of that mentality. Not everything that is going to happen in the way that you want it to, but what is destined to be yours will eventually become yours.
Add to that, just a thought of why is that important. It's important when you have potentially a broken family structure, that you lack the emotional and mental support in your adolescence. So you're looking outside of yourself for validation. Like Shireen said, you're combating what you see and dislike about yourself when it comes to these crime rates. But it was all still like how the internal was affecting the external. And along with that, that's like fashion comes in with that, like, you know, materialism.
Well, it's
like,
easy. You said like the guy with the car is the perfect example. You know, he's the person who's the closest to you, and then you've got the things on the TV that corroborate the life that he's leading, and then it's the closest thing to you. And actually, these people who are doing drugs, similar to what you're saying, to get into this, they've got money to throw around. So it's almost like, oh, here you go. Here's a taste of what you can have if you kind of do.
And that's another part of it, is that in communities, there are older kids that are in that crime facility already grooming
Younger
8
kids.
to 10-year-olds to take the place of the next person who's probably going to be the victim.
Reduce
The
my risk.
government are actually really trying to do work on combating it, because they've noticed child criminal exploitation does start as young as 8. So you've got projects going into primary schools to dissuade children from participating in gangs. And even some of the statistics that I've read, let's say in terms of knife crime, children are more inclined to actually be harmed at school during the day or near somewhere that they frequent as a child.
Wow.
And I think the stat for London was like, it was really, really, really high of how many children have been harmed by their school, aged 10 to 15. I think I was looking at the stat.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a really, really young, that's year 5 to year 10.
Sure.
That's a really, really young age where you're impressionable and the fears are real because you're smaller, you haven't developed. And if from 12 you get used to carrying a knife, by the time you're 16, it's no issue for you to use it.
That's a core memory. If anyone's seen Inside Out, that's a core memory. It's like, I can't go out without my knife and my phone.
And
you know?
I'm not even gonna like sitting here for Shireen and I being women, even at that. When we were girls, we've had the same thought process as well. I you know, you carry for protection, or you know, you don't know what's coming at you.
No.
So you've always got to feel like you've got to be a step ahead. And that is not a way to grow up. For children to stop being children, that, you know, the only thing they have to focus on a daily basis in certain areas is staying alive.
Yeah. And do you know what? It's funny, you use the keyword step ahead, and I think this is, to me, that word really resonates a lot with me, because one of the things I've been saying for a long time, when I look at a lot of the young people now, and I see sometimes some of them are quite animated and quite loud. Now, being a Caribbean-born British male, obviously I've grown up particularly around my black friends, and we're very loud and very animated. My parents, I've seen it from all my parents' friends. However, what I've seen is in recent years, because the cultures have merged a lot more, there's often a pressure for certain kids from certain demographics to be ahead of that. So there's always this race to be ahead, whether that's in terms of how you present yourself, how you conduct yourself. So the underlying theme that I tend to see across youth culture is this need to be ahead. Now, at the extreme level, that's crime. But even at a very basic thread, it's want to be seen and perceived in a certain way. So I'm
isn't that the £200 phone as well? Looking the part, like you said before.
That's the part and parcel of growing up. At this age, especially in your adolescence, you're trying to find your community and figure out where you fit in. Like even in your brain, that's when psychologists argue, that's when parents and family no longer have a standing in what happened, in how you behave and the actions that you take. A lot of it is directed by your peers and what you want your peers to think of you. And if you're in a society where the ideal is to look strong and be the top guy or a step ahead, you're going to start doing more and more outlandish things to display that behavior. But even when we bring it down to little things, in terms of crime, because a lot of young people participate in crime and don't really realise they're participating in crime. Now, I remember working in schools and being called into offices and being shown pornographic content that had been uploaded to social media pages of 13-year-olds, and having to contact parents and saying, who is your child engaging with? Do you know their friends? Do you know this has been put online? Can you take your child's phone and go through your child's phone? I've even called my own siblings after seeing some of this and said to them, go and check my niece's phone. And they'll be like, "What?" I'm like, "You don't know. You don't even want to know what I saw at work today. But go and check her phone. Make sure you have constant access to that. Make sure you know what she's doing as much as possible. And know, as parents, you can't police and protect your children all the time. But if you have a relationship with your child, where at any given time you are able to pinpoint exactly where they are, then you are doing something good. Yes, your child might be in the wrong place at the wrong time, but you have some oversight. I think we're in a situation where a lot of parents, one, they don't have the energy a lot of the time. They're fighting way too many battles, and there's too many things for themselves to be a step ahead.
Everyone's dealing with their own fights, and no one's at a baseline where they're in a good position to deal with these sorts of things. To me, it sounds like a lot, like through the pandemic and stuff, just communicate.
That's it, learning to communicate. And maybe that's one of the solutions for communities and families, is teaching them how to communicate with each other. I always ask myself the question is, why does it take for a trauma situation to occur before therapy kind of models assist in helping heal somebody? We should be learning those models that we can use in our everyday life before, because it might counteract the trauma experience completely.
100%. No, I 100%, and I'm now learning that now about myself. You know, how do I make these an everyday practice? Okay, just what I'm going to say, because I'm aware that we've been on here for a little while, and I feel like this where we're potentially going can go somewhere else. So, just with what we've talked about, is there any kind of closing thoughts, at least with what we've got, where we've gone so far, that you just want to leave with people?
Take time and breathe, and also like take away the statistics and the opinion. Just be human. Like, it's literally free to be kind. And if you can extend that into your family, then your family can extend that into their neighborhood, and hopefully that neighborhood, you know, what's the cause and effect? It takes only 30-something% to change the whole vibration of 100.
Nice.
So that's it, really. It's free to be kind, be mindful, understand situations, and if we're not talking about them, then they will never change. That's it.
I think, just as a general, one thing I loved when I worked in education, as hard as it was working in a school with like 1,800 students and all this rah noise every day, I always, at the end of the day, had one reason to smile about a young person that I worked with. They either said something that was so outlandish that it was hilarious, or they did something that was hilarious, or they achieved something that I was just like, I'm so proud of you. So I think, just in general, especially with people that work with young people, I know this job is relentless. I know it's really hard, and it can be triggering and it's emotional, but every day just sit down and think, what is one good thing that has happened with a young person that I've worked with today, or even your own children? What is a good thing that has happened with that person today?
It's having a bit of gratitude, right? And looking at the fresh perspectives that they bring you. I have a 6-year-old, and sometimes she says things, and sometimes I go to palm it off like, so dumb, and then I walk away, and I'm like, no, that was the hottest thing I heard this week. Like, and I sit down and want to learn more, and at that moment she's looking at me blank. Like, now she doesn't know what she said, and I'm like, and on a final note, go and check their phone. Based on this conversation, they're looking at stuff. Go check the phone.
Unless they listen to our podcast. And that's
Then they can listen to it all day long.
They told our moms to check our phone.
They're all changing their PIN numbers now.
Like, if you're listening to this and you like what you've heard from, myself, Ivan, our guests, Jodie and Shireen, leave a comment, because I think it's important to say your opinion. And if there's anything that's resonated with you, let us know. Because, again, how do we know? We want to know what you think. We're doing these conversations that people like yourselves can be listening and hopefully taking something away. And at that point, I just want to thank you once again, Jodie, Shireen. Ivan, big yourself up. Is there anything you want to say before we leave this place?
No, thank you so much for tuning in. And hopefully we can, we've sparked a bit of interest. And to Alex's point, we want to hear from you as well. You're just as much as part of the conversation as we are. So leave any thoughts you've got, and the conversation has just started. So until next time.
Peace.